Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. So, do I need to use the mic? I think y'all can hear me, right? Yes.
Depends how loud you speak, right?
I think it's better if I just come down. Okay, assalamu alaikum. That's good? Okay. I'm actually going to try without the mic, if you don't mind. And then if you all can't hear me, then... So I wanted to talk about wills and trust. And I don't know about the Islamic part in terms of what is the importance, but I know there's a hadith out there that do not spend a night unless you have a will written down. And, why is a will important? The number one thing is that we all are not going to live forever, right? We all know that we're all going to, inshallah, move on to a better life. And when you do pass on, and actually it's very difficult to talk about wills, because, when I'm talking to a client, I'm saying, well, when you die, and it's just an uncomfortable topic sometimes. But, when we all move on, we need to make sure that we plan what happens to our wealth and for our children a little bit better. Because we don't live in a Muslim country, of course. And the laws of the land kind of kick in when you don't make your own decisions. By default, if you're married and you pass on, your wealth does go to your spouse. And if you trust your spouse, you're in a good relationship, there's nothing to worry about. Hopefully she or he will take care of the business and move on and take care of your children. The problem comes is when both of you die or pass on in an accident. And we don't think about that often, but I get a call maybe once every 7 or 8 months. It's actually 2 a year sometimes, where both parents have passed on and they don't have a will. And so what happens to the children? What happens to your money? Now, we do have a very good court system. There is a special court called a probate court that is in charge of taking care of your wills and taking care of your money after your death if you haven't left something called a will. But do you really want a stranger making a decision for you? I don't think so, right? Especially who's going to take care of your children. And so it's very important for you to specify at least 2 things in your will. Who's going to be in charge of your money if both of you are gone? And who's going to make decisions for your children when you're gone? Now, why do I separate them both? Some of us think that it's okay to appoint a guardian for your child and let them make all the decisions for money and for, things like where they're going to go to college or what car to buy them. I always recommend that appoint 2 people, because then 2 people will have to come to an agreement. One is called a guardian of the wealth, and one is called a guardian of the person to make a decision. And so if you've got 2 people out there that can think about it and make a decision, hopefully they'll make the right decision for your child. Now, what does it take to make a will? It's a very, very simple document. I have a little worksheet, it's a 1-page worksheet. I'm going to pass it out at the end. You all can fill it out. We can actually have your will done in less than 5 minutes. All it says who you are, who you're married to, how many children you have, and how you want your wealth distributed. Now, us being Muslims, we know that the Quran and the Hadith, lay out a certain pattern for us. And so most of the Muslim wills that are created simply say that my wealth is redistributed according to the Islamic teachings. And that's all you have to put. You don't have to go and specify my wife gets this, my husband gets this, and my children get this. You are allowed to give 1/3 of your wealth away to a charity. So you can specify that. If you don't, then it's done according to Islamic principles. But again, it's not about your wealth. It's about who takes care of your children, especially if they're minor. So that's what the wills that we produce, Islamic wills, have this clause of what happens to care of your children. Now, how many of us trust that our 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, if they inherit $500,000, will do the right thing with them? You all have faith and confidence in that? No? Okay. Most of us think that we're not going to have a lot of wealth when we die. But, alhamdulillah, the Muslims are one of the most prosperous communities in the U.S., right? And because we work, we save, and we've got this habit of saving, mashallah, the clients that walk in through my door, they'd both be, even like blue-collar workers. But if you look at their wealth that they've accumulated, the house and the car and the 401ks, it's reaching $500,000 to $600,000, right? And so if an 18-year-old gets that money, what are they going to do with it? You just don't know, right? So there's something called a trust. And so I'm going to briefly talk about what a trust is. And that's a very, very good vehicle for us to think about and to create. How many of you know what a trust is? Have you all heard the word trust before? You all have trust yourself? You do? Okay. So a trust is a document that actually can direct what happens to your money even if you're not living. So let's say I have a house, and I say I create a trust called ABC, doesn't matter what you call it, and I say I'm going to put that trust, that house in the trust, and for the next 20 years, the income from that house is going to go to my child. At the end of 20 years, he's allowed to sell it and do whatever he wants with it. You can even put conditions like, oh, when he graduates college, or when he gets married to a certain person, he can get that money, or she can get that money. So you're able to control your wealth a little bit more in a trust, even after you're gone, because you think that's the right decision to make. Now, there is a doctrine in law, it's called controlling from the grave. Okay? And you can't create a trust and say, okay, I own this $1 million home, I'm going to put this in trust, and for the next 200 years, nobody can sell it, nobody can do anything to it, and you just get an income out of it. 200 years, my great-great-grandkids can have it. There are a certain number of years, I think it's either 71 or 51, after which the government comes in and says, okay, this trust is over. We're not going to have somebody from the grave control this piece of property for all these decades while the general public can't benefit from it. Okay? So when you create a trust, it has got to be finite. Now, there's two kinds of trusts. There's something called a revocable trust and something called an irrevocable trust. Revocable means that I can change my mind anytime I want. You know, I make a trust, I give the house, I say my child can benefit from it, and 3 days later I say, well, I'm not happy with you, I take it back. Irrevocable means once I've given it, that's it. I can't change my mind. Now, why would anybody want to create an irrevocable trust? Any ideas? If it's your house, it's your money, you should be able to change it any time that you want, right? So why would anybody want to ever create an irrevocable trust? So the main advantage of that is that once it's an irrevocable trust, it's not in your control. When you get sued and the creditors want your money, that's not your property anymore. So if you want to protect your wealth and you don't want creditors and you're about to go into a business and you think the business is a little risky, or you're about to do something that, I know none of us do anything that we shouldn't be doing, but if it's risky out there, then you put that in an irrevocable trust. Okay? In the state of Texas, a will has to have your signature on it, and it has to have 2 witnesses, and that's it. If you notarize it, great. If you don't notarize it, that's okay. What if you can't sign? What if you don't know how to write? You can just put your little mark. Sometimes, I'm called into a hospital where a brother or sister is very sick, and they know the doctor said you have 5 days to live. And, I actually walked into a situation where this brother couldn't speak. He couldn't, even move his hand. When he tried to sign his name, it came out as just jaggedy lines. So what we did was we actually had him do a thumbprint, and then we made a movie of it so that if there's any dispute out there, there is a witness that he was the one who actually signed this. Now, what if somebody disputes your will? So you wrote a will, you have the 2 witnesses, fast forward 35 years, 40 years, when it's time to take care of the will, somebody says, well, this was fraud. What do you think would happen then? Any ideas? Witness. Of course, we'll end up in the court somehow, right? You look for the witnesses, right? What if both the witnesses have deceased by then?
It's the judge, I think.
Very good. So the judge can look at the circumstances. That's why in Texas what we do is we create a document called a self-proving will. And so what you do is you create a will, you have your 2 witnesses, then you create a separate document with the same 2 witnesses saying, well, we have witnessed this will, that it was this particular person. Okay? Seems kind of redundant, but It's called a self-proving affidavit. If you include that, you don't need the wills. Sorry, you don't need witnesses. So once they're gone, they're gone. You're totally fine by it. Okay? Now, how many of us in this room actually have a will? MashaAllah. You know when most Muslims get a will? 2 hours before they go for Hajj, right? Because what happens is, I mean, of course, we all come back. Alhamdulillah, most of us do. But they feel like that now they're going, they're not going to come back. If something happens to them, at least their kids are taken care of. And it's okay because, I don't have a will myself, unfortunately. Okay, let me just kind of give this. Whoa, did I go? So this is all that's needed to kind of create a will. So if you all ever want a will, you just fill that out, you send it to me, and at no charge we'll get that will for you, okay? Now, of course, it has your name, it has your spouse's name, it has who your children are, it asks you who's going to be the guardian of your children when you're not here. I put the guardian of person, guardian of the wealth. But I don't actually put your wealth out there. Why do you think that's the case?
Because the wealth will change.
Very good, the wealth will change, right? So if you make a will today, and 5 years from now you bought 2 more houses, mashallah, your 401k has gone up, you've got 2 other life insurance or whatever policies you have. So how do you actually put your wealth into your will? Well, how would you do that? Any ideas?
Whatever is under my name when I die.
Okay. That reminds me of a story. So I had a friend whose dad, this is back home. He actually bought 3 pieces of land in wealthiest neighborhoods. And before he could tell his children what he had bought, where he had bought it, he passed away. And they could never find out, where he had bought those things. So you're right, but how would you know what's in your name? Would you go to each bank? Would you go to each county to figure out where you made the investments? So this is what I recommend. Tell somebody trustworthy that there is a list that you maintain, a Google Doc, a spreadsheet you maintain, said this is all my current wealth, these are my account numbers. Don't have to give you passwords there or anything like that. My account numbers, if I ever die, that's what you do. So a lot of people in the night drawers have a little list that they update, or I've got a friend who updates it, online, and stores it there. So if you want to put your wealth in your will, it's good, but you're going to find yourself amending it every 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years as it goes out. And when you sell your property, now you're worried again, about what to do with that. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
So that will that they provide before you go to Hajj, is that a good will? Is it recognized? Is that enough?
Yes, it is. So a lot of the masajids, and I know in Plano, because I go there every Hajj season, there's actually a line. We actually have a standard format, like an Islamic will. I'm sure a lot of Islamic institutions give that. We fill it out. We get the 2 witnesses. They're right there. And it hasn't had to be used so far, but those are valid wills. Now, that actually brings a good point. How does somebody know you actually have a will? So you create a document, you get the 2 witnesses, and you put it in your night drawer, and then one day they want your will. How do they know you have a will? Is there like a central repository where you store it? There's actually not. And, some people ask me as a law firm, can you keep a copy of my will? Well, I say, when it's time, what if I'm not around? What happens to that document? So the first rule is don't make a lot of copies of your will. Because if you want to change it sometime in the future, now you've got 4 copies, different versions floating around. So have 1 original, 1 copy, and give it to a loved one. Let your kids know. Let your brothers and sisters know that, look, here's the will, this is where I keep it, and if something happens to me, that's what I want you to do with it. Okay? But there is no central repository, or the court system will not maintain your wills at all for you. Yes, sir.
do we have to be in the state of Texas, or, I mean,
So that's actually a good question. So every state has its own laws. If you're in the state of Texas, you should write a will according to the state of Texas. Now, what if you made a will in Texas and you moved to Louisiana? I don't know why you would do that, but if you moved to Louisiana, the document, because it was created at that time, was valid in Texas, is good anywhere, because it was created at that time. Now, the laws of the wills and things like that, they don't really change. As long as the judge can figure out that that was your intention, he will honor it. What really happens is a lot of people come in and say, you know, this person was not in their mental capacity, and therefore this will has to be kind of undone, right? Now, how do you prove that somebody wasn't in the mental capacity or not? What if I give you a will that has your signature and 2 witnesses, and I want to prove that that wasn't your will? What would you do? What if somebody had put a gunpoint, you know, to your head and said, sign this will, and they brought their 2 own witnesses with them and said, sign all this away, and let's go for it? Something you can do, actually, because it's a valid document. You're going to have to bring a lot of other evidence saying, you know, this wasn't me, there was a gun pointed to my head, these witnesses are not my witnesses, and that's where the probate court kind of kicks in. So, you know, if you write a will, giving your will away to a stranger, and the judge looks at it when you've got, you know, 5 kids, mashallah, then the judge will say, well, okay, most likely this is a fraud. Okay? Otherwise, you know, most of the battles that we see in court are that it is your will, you did sign it, but you just weren't mentally sound because the decisions you made weren't the right decisions. Okay, any other questions and comments? Yes.
To feel the urgency of having a will, what will happen, you know, if you don't have a will and you pass away, and, you know, what does the government do normally?
That is actually a very good question. And, and you know, it changes all the time, and that's why I carry my little notes here. So the first thing that's going to happen is, if in Texas you're survived by your spouse, then your spouse gets everything. Okay? Now, what if you have a spouse and you have children that are not the spouse's children? So you were previously married, you've got 2 children, and now you've got a new spouse, let's say a new husband. Now, if you die and the husband gets everything, that means your children get nothing, right? And once your husband dies, then maybe his relatives will get it, and your children will be kind of left alone. So we've got these very complex formulas in the state law, saying that, you know, if you die, then this portion goes to your spouse, this portion goes to common children, and this portion goes to your children from a prior marriage. And you know, the culture that we live in, we have people who had several marriages, several stepchildren, in fact, several children out of wedlock, you know, that are accounted for. So it's really interesting, the people who actually wrote the statute thought about everything, you know. What if you had a child that nobody ever knew about, but suddenly came up after your death and claimed through some DNA test that I'm their child? What happens when you didn't have a will? So that's why it's always important to have a will, because you just don't know what the state law is at that time. But generally, if you have a spouse and the only children you have is from that spouse, then it's okay, because it's going to go to the spouse and then eventually go to your children.
But other than that, they will decide how to distribute it according to the law. Do they take portion of it? My understanding is that the government will take portion of your wealth if you don't have a will, and distribute the rest to them.
So the state of Texas, or any state, will only take your wealth, if you have no relative at all. So what they do is they first look down to see if you got any children. Then they look up to see if you got any parents. Then they look sideways to see if you got brothers and sisters. Then they go back and see if you got any uncles and aunts, nephews and nieces. When you've got nobody within 1 generation removed, then it goes to Texas. Now, only 0.1% of the wealth actually ever goes to the state of Texas. It's a very, very small number. But what I'm really worried about, and this happens quite a bit, is Muslim kids going and becoming under the guardianship of non-Muslim families, right? Because you didn't put a guardian in your will, and yes, the probate court is going to ask the family to come forward, but what if you're here as a student, you know, and the kids are U.S. citizens, and you don't have any family here, and you both pass, and you die in an accident. Well, your children are U.S. citizens, the court's going to take jurisdiction and say, well, where do these kids go? Can anybody come forward? Until the family can come in, you know, and come and take them, or the kids can be transferred overseas. So even if it's for a small time, you know, I think it's really important for us to know where our children will go if we're not alive, okay? Brothers and sisters, whoever it may be. I never want to let a person who's sitting on the bench, no matter how sincere he is, how educated he is, listen to my story for 10 minutes and make a decision. I'm not talking about divorce, but just kind of give you an idea. You know, a lot of husband and wife, when they're getting divorced, they're fighting over kids, and they say, oh, let's go to in front of a judge and we'll decide. You've got a stranger deciding the future of your children. You know, where they live, what they do, how they do it, because the parents can't agree. The same thing with the will, you know. We really want to make sure that we write down at least, if nothing else, about your wealth, because as Muslims, you know, we believe that our wealth should be distributed according to the Islamic principles, but put down your guardian. You can have a will that doesn't talk about your wealth, just talks about guardians, and that's totally fine too. And say everything else according to Islamic principles, and you'll be fine.
Excuse me. Can you,
Yes, ma'am.
excuse me.
Yes, sister.
Can you put your will according to the Islamic law? Like you said that I want everything will be divided according to the Quran and Sunnah, that's it?
Yes.
You don't have to put names and everything.
You don't, but what actually happens is, most of the wills that the Islamic Institute put out actually have a chart attached to it, saying if you're survived by one daughter, one son, or, you know,
Yeah.
they actually distribute it there.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why, because, you know, there may be a dispute as to what is according to Quran and Sunnah. And so now you've got another court battle, and maybe, you know, $20,000 of your wealth is spent on judges and sorry, not judges, lawyers and
Yeah.
court fees and things like that. So you could put there, but most Islamic wills actually kind of define, so you can just go through and make sure that is your understanding. I mean, this is a blank sheet, but
Yeah, yeah,
usually
this is how- Yeah.
there's actually a chart. In fact, the one that's put by ISNA, the chart is just so fantastic. It talks about, it's like a 7-page chart. It talks about every possibilities. It even talks about, you know, you've got no kids, you were never married, your parents are gone, and what happens to your brother and sister? It goes to your brother and sisters and nieces and nephews. So I prefer that version instead of just the single sentence.
Okay. And how about if your money is out of the United States?
That's okay.
That's okay. You
That's okay.
put in the will.
The wealth, actually gets a good point. So let's say you own a home in Texas, and all your people who inherit live outside. That property will be in their name. Now, whether they can come here and benefit from it, or, you know, they're going to have to.
The opposite. If your property is out of the States, is it the same if you own it?
That's an excellent point. So what if you have a house overseas and you died, right?
Yeah.
And you say that I would like this house to be given to so-and-so. Now, the U.S. courts will rule that, okay, this house should go to my son, for example.
Yeah.
However, the country, and this happens a lot overseas, will say, no, 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 this is against our rules, our policies. And so we're not going to honor that. Yes, you wanted that will. It may be a valid will, but not according to our laws. Because our law says so-and-so. Our law says that a foreigner can't own a property, they can't go to it. So what I recommend actually is if you've got property overseas, figure out those laws and have a will that addresses that property. And in your will in the U.S., just say that I've got a subsequent will that addresses the property so-and-so.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there an inheritance tax? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you have to pay tax if there are people who are going to inherit?
So up to, and the limit goes up every year, but up to $5.45 million is tax exempt. Over that, the federal government takes 40% and then gives the rest to your people, you know, your inheritors. The state of Texas, though, does not have any inheritance tax. Now, we're talking a little bit about how to, if you are worth $5.45 million, I'd like to meet you first. Secondly, there are ways to avoid that, and we'll talk about that too.
If somebody dies here, say I die, and I have one child, does that child have to go through the court system, or can you just present that will, say I only have a bank account? Can you go to the bank, show them the will, and access the account that way, or do you have to hire a lawyer?
Well, that's a very good question. So, there is a certain limit of your estate, and every state has a different limit. So if it's less than 100,000, then it's called an informal probate, where you don't have to hire lawyers or go to probate court. You can just make a declaration, tell the court that this is the only wealth they have, and it's just a piece of paper. For example, you have a house, you leave behind one child, that child's going to sign affidavit. Somebody's going to witness it, saying that yes, this was the child, and you go to the county register and you register it, the house is yours now. So there is a certain level of wealth where the courts don't get involved. But if it's a business, or if it's something to do with some complicated contracts you may have, life insurance policies you may have, then you may want to involve that. Most of the time the courts are involved because there's a dispute. Somebody's saying it's an invalid will, or the person was mentally not capable of making it. Yes, sir.
So if I have my will prepared by not under an Islamic umbrella, and I say as such, if I pass away, my wife is 100% in charge. She's the executor and she's the guardian of everything, the kids and the wealth and everything. Same thing for her. Her will say the same if she passes away before I do. That I will, and if we both pass away together or whatever, then we have a third person whom we trust, and we appoint him as executor and the guardian. Is there anything wrong with that picture?
So from a legal point of view, there's absolutely nothing wrong at all. Like I said, a will is exactly what you wanted to happen to your wealth. And if that's what you want, you can do that. You can give your wealth to your spouse. You can give your wealth to a charity, to an organization. We've stopped giving wealth to animals. There was a time where you could actually give your wealth to your dog, but we don't do that anymore. Okay? Which I'm thinking is a good law. But there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? However, whenever I start talking with a client, I always give them the option that, this is an Islamic will, and here is a regular will, and then they choose, and they can choose whatever. Now, there is a way to solve this problem, and the way to solve this problem is, you may want to say, well, I want to do what, let's say my Sharia says, whatever your understanding is, without any comment on it, but at the same time, I want to do it this way. So, a will only comes into place after your death. Today if I'm living and I want to give away, this file to whoever I want, there's nothing in Sharia that's going to say I can't give my property away. So that's where trusts come in. Because trust is giving away your wealth during your life. So a lot of people create trusts and they don't have any wealth when they die. It was all given before. And you can even do this. You can give away your house to whoever you want to. Let's say your children, or in equal shares. Let's say you don't want to do, like it says, 2 shares for the boy and 1 share for the girl. And you can retain what we call a life estate. Life estate means that as long as I'm living, this house is mine. But the minute I die, this house is not mine anymore. So again, our law considers that at the moment of your death, that property wasn't yours to begin with. So no will applies. So that's a way where if you create a trust, you can actually avoid the whole will process totally. And all your wills just remains then is who becomes the guardian of my children. See, what's interesting is, as a lawyer, people come and say, they already made up their mind what they want to do. They say, I want to get this thing done. Find me a legal way to do it. They don't ask me, is this legal or not? So it's always interesting. You got to think out of the box and say, okay, how can I get this thing done and really accomplish what's needed, but make sure that it's protected legally. Okay. Oh, so, I'm sorry.
Because I wasn't here in
Oh, okay.
the beginning. To make my will, I only write it and give it to someone who I trust. I don't need to go to any government or social to witness it. Just anyone I trust only.
No, you don't have to, there's no repository, there's no central authority to give it to. You just keep a copy of it and then let somebody know who you trust. A lot of people, what they do is they just make a copy and maybe email it to a couple of friends, to the family, because emails are easily searchable and things like that. So, but there is no repository out there. In fact, it's discouraged because what if you change your mind down the road and now you need to go through some process and update it. Let's say you live in Texas, you have your will here, then you move to Louisiana, you move to California. I mean, we used to have these kind of things, but they did away with all of them.
What about the money the government they have it? Like, with money the government they have it and they need to give it to someone.
For example, Social Security benefits.
Yeah, something, yeah.
So if the government, okay, so if anybody has your money and you know that eventually you're going to get it, you can will that. You can say, this is money that I deserve, this needs to be given to so-and-so. However, a lot of the things that government gives you, like Social Security, really depend on your life. Once your life is not here, then that benefit goes away.
No, if I give it to, to give it to the mosque or to Arabic, to the mosque, yes.
Yeah, so you can give your wealth away to anybody that you want. Under the form that I have for the Islamic will, it says that you can give up to 1/3 of your wealth to a charity if you want to, and 2/3 is decided according to the Sharia law. So you can give it to anybody that you want. Now, in fact, there's some
government question.
The government cannot question any decision that you make. You can say, I mean, I wouldn't give it to an organization that's in that blacklist or whatever. That would really make difficult, not for you, but for your family. But they cannot question anything about your will. You want to give it away to anybody? That's totally fine.
I have 2 years case, and it's still the lawyer is it's hard.
Okay, we can talk offline, inshallah, if there's a particular instance. But if it's your money, you can do whatever you want with it. There's nothing that the law says that you shall, will this money to this person.
Corporation to anyone?
Yes.
Or
Yes, sir.
How is it with negative wealth? So if you owe money to somebody, or
That's like most of us here, right?
What's they want to die broke?
How is that handled?
Yeah, you can will your debt too. No, I'm just kidding.
The state will pay it off.
I'm just wondering how that is here in the US.
Right, so most wills say that, my wealth will be first used to pay my debts, and whatever remains should be given out.
Is it also the state law here in the US?
It is, yes.
Okay.
So let's say that you pass on and you have left $200,000 in medical bills, okay? Because you didn't have insurance and it was a very complicated procedure. Actually, I had this case. A gentleman, he, mashallah, owned 2 gas stations, maybe worth $500,000. But just before his death, his hospital bill was approaching $500,000.
Wow.
So all of a sudden his family was, going to inherit nothing. So there are ways to avoid that. Most hospitals will write off that bill if you say the person died with no insurance. They can go and claim, they can file a lien, they can go to probate court. Whenever a business is distributed among your heirs, and you're going through the probate court gives 30-day notice to everybody. You have to publish in the paper. If you have an objection, come and file your objection now. So there is a process out there. But usually most debts that I've seen with my clients, it's the hospital just write it off. Now personal, I know credit card companies write them off because I've written letters myself to the credit card companies.
the credit card.
I've written letters myself to all the credit card companies that so-and-so has passed away and stopped, sending collection letters. Personal loans, it's really your relationship with them. That's a good question. What happens to the debt?
But what happens, let's say, for instance, you write your will and you don't include anything about the debt, and somebody comes to your, here's, and you say, guys, I have a proof that, your dad borrowed this much from money, from me. How do they handle this?
Of course, you can, so even from a legal perspective, the very first thing we advise is try to make a compromise and negotiation yourself. So if you think it's a valid debt, we as Muslims believe that if you have a debt outstanding, you can't move on to Jannah or whatever your beliefs are there. I'm sure the people will take care of the debt. Otherwise, he can actually go file a claim. So what you do is you file a lawsuit, not against that person, against estate of, let's say, Muhammad, right? So that lawsuit is pending. Now, whatever the estate of Muhammad is, and it could be a house, it could be a car or a business, then they have to go and defend. So the lawyers will represent the estate of, and then the lawsuit will proceed. So you can still sue somebody. In fact, it's happened to me where I actually sued a client, and he passed away in the middle. And, but I didn't sue a client. My client wanted to sue somebody who passed away in the middle. And my client insisted that we continue. So then I had to change it to say state of so-and-so and continued on. Yes, brother?
Can you include anything about if you're in life support and your will, as well as for the kids, like if they are little ones, what's that appropriate age that you want the guardian to execute that will? So I want to, for example, I have a house and I want my kids to own that house and give them that money when they're 25 years old, not less than that. Can you, is that included?
Right, so what you would do in that case is you can create what we call a testamentary trust. So the will say that I want my child to have this money, but I'm creating a trust. The trust is going to own this money, and my child's going to get the benefit, whatever the investment profit is, and at 25, he can actually have the principal. So you can have a trust that's created exactly at the time of death. So that's one way to do it. Now, what you were talking about life support, which is I think is a different question, is our will that we create actually has a document in there of what to do if you are declared kind of brain dead, right? Or if you are in a condition where should you be on a ventilator or not. So you can make that decision now and put it there. That do not resuscitate or do not do this to me. By default, if you don't have that, then your next of kin, which is defined as your spouse or a child, will make that decision for you. But most wills actually have a page that says, in case something happens to me, keep me on the ventilator for 3 days or 4 days and then let it go. Yes, brother?
So for a husband and wife, do you create like two separate wills and a third will, like if both get deceased, or?
So husband and wife usually have a mirror will, which means that if I die, then my wife gets everything and the children. And if she dies, then the husband gets everything. And if both die, then there is a guardian that gets everything for the kids' benefit and goes on. So it's not a third will. The main will actually have this clause in there that what if both die? And what they do is, so let's say that the husband passes away, everything goes to the wife, and 20 days later the wife passes away, and again you got to go and rush and do all the will execution. So most wills say that if both husband and wife die within 90 days of each other, we consider them that they died simultaneously. So you don't have to go through the one process of transferring and then go through another process of transferring. So you can do 30 days, you can do 90 days.
What if they both die, dad and mom, and the guardian is from out of state? How it works for the kids?
So that's fine. If that's what the parents' wish was, the court will honor that and the kids will relocate to that particular guardian. As long as the child is under 18, then the guardian gets to make the decision. So the guardian wants to live out of state, that's fine. If the guardian actually wants to move out of the country, that's fine too, because it was your decision to do that. Now, let's say that it was your decision to give guardianship to your brother, and your sister says that this is not a right thing, she can always go to court and say, I want guardianship. And now the judge decides whether he should honor your wish, if that's the best interest of the child, or what your sister is saying. So what happens is the law says that it has to be the best interest of the child. And our law assumes that a parent will make the best interest of the child decision, but if somebody challenges it, the court will listen to it. Okay? So yeah, you can move out, you can move out of the country too.
What if you just want to bypass the court and the probate and all that?
You create a trust.
Right. So, so you would suggest that most of us, instead of just will, we should get serious about trust. Because talking about will all this time, it may create problem later on. I know it may cost a little extra to do the trust.
Right.
But, in my opinion, we should preach our people, it's good to have will, at least have some document. But in the long term, as we all going to live here, we should create or trust the best way to go. As a lawyer, you would not want to say that.
Right, right. Well, you know, as a lawyer, yeah, please create trust, I make more money off of trust.
But in my opinion, I mean, as I'm listening, if we don't educate our ummah, that
Right.
look, will is of course we need to have minimum, something to have. But to avoid all the confusion and fight and this and that, try to work on the trust as much possible.
Yes. You see, with the trust, you can even control
Exactly.
what happens, when it happens, and who it happens to.
What I'm trying to say,
Yes.
when you're going to teach us about will, we get so much confused about the will and whatever, and then later on we can be in big problem later on. So as a Muslim attorney, you know our mindset, what we are, the way we are. In my opinion, you can say whatever about will you're saying, but you should enforce almost, say, hey brothers, this is the way to go. It's going to cost you little or more, but this is what I suggest to do. This is what I'm saying. Or we waste our time of beating unnecessary documents, you know. The will is okay to have, but I'm just suggesting to you as a lawyer, so please work
Right.
on that.
You actually have a valid point because trusts are so sophisticated in something. Let me share with you a little example of a charitable trust. You know, we all want to give a donation and we want the benefit of the tax deduction, right? So let's say at my death, I know that I'll have maybe $300,000 in something that I want to donate. But when I donate on my death, I never got the tax benefit during my life because I'm not going to file any more taxes after that, right? So a charitable trust actually allows you to transfer that $300,000, let's say to Mass, and because I did $300,000 now, I get the tax benefit now while I'm living, so I pay less taxes, but I also get a life estate in that, and I can keep living in that house. So I keep living, I get the benefit of living there, I get the tax benefit, and at my death, the charity gets the benefit that I need to get. So that's called a charitable trust. So we all can kind of work on that so we get that benefit that nobody else will get because once you're gone, you don't file taxes. So you're correct. The trust actually is very least understood concept because we don't have it back home, you know, and if we do, it's totally brand new. But the reason I do want everybody to have a will is I'd like your kids to be taken care of in terms of the guardianship, you know. That's a minimum I think we need to do. I understand that, you know, whatever we believe we want our property to be distributed according to Islamic principles or not, but the kids should be taken care of who you want them to be taken care of.
If you have an irrevocable trust,
Yes, ma'am.
and the beneficiary pass away, so what would happen to that trust and your lifetime?
So, if the beneficiary passes away, right? So whatever the laws of that beneficiary's intestate, it doesn't mean dying without a will. So a beneficiary either had a will before they passed away, and they wanted to know what would happen to their will, that would kick in. And if they passed without a will, then what the state law says will happen. So let's say your beneficiary, my beneficiary was my son, okay? And it just happened that, you know, unfortunately, he's no more. So whoever are his heirs, you know, his wife, his kids, then they would benefit. They would step in his shoes because they would have benefited from that if he had gotten that wealth.
even if he's not married yet, I mean, if he's still like underage.
So if he's not married, then so remember how we go down, we say go spouse, then we go to the kids. If there's no kids, no spouse, then it goes back to the parents. And if not parents, then siblings.
So that irrevocable trust will come back to you in certain way?
That's actually a good point. It can. I mean, you might get that benefit again, because you were the heir to that benefit. But I actually haven't explored that option. That's actually a great question. Yes, sir.
So, is there any Islamic guidelines that who the guardian of the children should be?
I think that's more of a question to a scholar. But to my knowledge and my experience, nobody's really come up with that. It's just who you're comfortable with, you know. 99% of people who come to me actually appoint their brothers and sisters. And it's very interesting to kind of see that conversation. She wants her brothers and sisters involved. He wants his brothers and sisters involved. And so there's a very interesting dynamic in the office when they're making that decision. But, you know, most of the people do that. Grandparents actually are involved too sometimes. But, you know, putting a grandparent there, and again, we're talking about statistics. You know, what is the possibility they're going to survive you? It's minimal. Okay, well, brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khair for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure. And, you know, my law office practices everything. We do immigration, we do family, criminal, bankruptcy, you name it, we do it. So, inshallah, if you have any questions, my phone number is right there.
Office, and you have few more attorneys with you.
So I have 4 other attorneys, and I have, mashallah, 19 paralegals. So we're 20, staff 25.
So your 4 attorneys you have, they are Muslims or non-Muslims?
So one is Muslim, and the other 3 are non-Muslims.
They all take their own separate cases, or you do take as a
No, so it's I own the law firm, and then they all work for me.
They work for you.
You make the estate planning, brother, or somebody else do that?
I'm sorry?
I have estate planning already. If I want to bring it to you to review
So I'd be in charge, but then I've got a guy who does estate planning for like 25 years. So, you know, he is a non-Muslim, but you know, he understands, he's worked with me for a while. He'll sit with you, I'll sit with you, and we'll plan that out.
You have your business card?
Yeah. Actually, I wrote out mine, so it's got all my contact, but it's got my assistant's name.
No.
So just put Bilal on there. He was very happy. You can give my card.
How far your office? Where?
So I'm on 75 and 635. The building is called Park Plaza. So as you go on 75, just before you hit 635, there's a black building.
1400?
It's 13111, next to Embassy Suites.
It's the same thing like they see, I mean...
The Desi building, yeah.
Yeah,
that's where I am, 4th floor.
I have a question, Ron, before you. You say the state of Texas don't have the no inheriting tax, right?
They don't.
No.
No state tax.
No tax, right? No state tax. Suppose the one spouse died, second one can completely inherit it, but the second one passed away and it's going to go to the kids, then it's going to be taxable, right?
No. So up to $5.45 million is not taxable.
Okay, now after that, if somebody have a $10 million portion,
Then it's taxable, up to 40%.
it's going to be first spouse won't have to do it, right?
No,
No, right?
No.
The second one is going to go, then they have to pay the 40%, right?
they do, yes.
Do
So
you
you
have
see-
anything, suggestion for how to avoid the 40%? Or what
Yes,
should we do?
so you create a trust. You create a trust.
With the trust, the kid's not gonna pay the 40%?
They're not going to if you do it right.
If you do it right.
Yes. But you see, here's the thing. At some point, no matter how big of a trust you create, and I haven't created a trust of $10 million, but at some point you're going to end up paying some tax. Because there's no way to protect, let's say you're worth $200 million.
Right.
There's no way to protect that. Okay? Unless you give it all away.
Right.
And that's why all these billionaires give away everything, because they'd rather give it away than have the government tax it.
Right.
But up to 10, 12, 13 million, you can plan it so you don't be taxed.
Then
You can
kids
start
don't
giving
have
your
access.
gifts.
Okay. One of them other thing, the revocable trust, if the one spouse dies, then it's becoming a irrevocable, right? If I have a revocable trust, and we have both spouses right now alive, if one passed away, the second one cannot change it, right? Anything, right? Because then it's becoming irrevocable.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that.
Yes.
Okay, this is the last question, and then we'll close out, inshallah.
401k, that now comes under social security, that will be protected.
Yeah, so 401k comes under a kind of like a contract, because there's a beneficiary for it. Okay? And so that is dealt separately. You name a beneficiary on your 401k and not put it in your will.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Bilal Khaleeq.
Thank you so much.
If you have any questions, you got his cards. We will be praying Aisha at 9:30, so that's 10 minutes from now to prepare yourselves. We are also selling labna or cheese in the front lobby for the Syrian refugees if you'd like to donate and purchase that. Jazakallah khair wa assalamu alaikum.